Are recording this webinar, and so just know it's a recorded webinar. It will be available on the Community Foundation's website as well as the Amazing Gift Training website if you want to share it, or if you have to leave early, you want to watch it again, this video webinar will be available. Some quick announcements from the Community Foundation. We've been updating every day our Community Foundation resource page, so be sure to visit our website and you can see all the resources we have there for nonprofits. We have the needs request form for you to fill out any of your current needs. And then every few weeks, we're sending out a needs assessment, which is just assessing what you need, not necessarily for a specific ask. So be on the lookout for that next needs assessment next week. But you can go ahead and start filling out any of your needs requests as soon as possible. There is a chat. If you have any questions throughout it, please go ahead and write into the chat, and we will try to use that chat to communicate. So we have two presentations from today. We have Barzella Papa with us, President and CEO of the Community Foundation. She's going to do our first presentation with us about how we should be communicating with our boards right now, and those of you that have direct contact with your boards and what you should be having a conversation with. And in the second half of the webinar, we're going to be joined by our own Tobias here in Gainesville. He is with Allstate now, and he is going to help us with some tips on social media. So first, I'm going to turn it over to Barzella, and of course, if you have questions, you can always use the chat. All right, Barzella, are you with us?
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, awesome. Okay, it was kind of coming in and out. So thank you everyone for joining us today. As Leslie said, please at any time use the chat bubble. This is kind of odd for me. I like being interactive with our groups and keeping these conversational, but things are a little different right now. So please at any time use the chat window to pop in a question, and we'll also have some time at the end. So I wanted to spend a little time here at the start, really touching base on what your boards should be doing now. This is really the ultimate test for a governing board. They truly are needing to be governing right now. And I know if any of you have sat through the Board Academy or any of our board training, you'll hear me talk about, the three legal obligations of a nonprofit board: the duty of care, the duty of obedience, the duty of loyalty. And those are really being put to the test right now for all organizations. So wanted to do it, just jump in real quick of what your board, you can hear. Okay, good. Making sure, can everyone hear? Oh, okay. Perfect, thank you. Making sure you can hear. Working from home, I have a spot by the wall I have to sit by. So Leslie is in control here of advancing the slides. So let's just jump right in. Everybody knows that the board is ultimately responsible for the organization. They can hand off the day-to-day responsibility to a staff, to management, but ultimately it is going to fall on their shoulders. So what is most important right now is that a board provide what, and you'll see here I emphasized it in bold and I italicized it: steady and adaptive leadership in partnership and in support of the chief executive. The board should be working closely with the chief executive to govern. As I said, they're really going to be putting their governance abilities to test during this, to manage the situation and to address external threats. So they really need to be monitoring risk management and risk assessment. So we've been laughing at the state level. We're calling this year the year of pivoting. Everybody's having to pivot. Our strategic plans are really being thrown out the window, and the boards have to be involved in this process. Go ahead, Leslie. So let's talk about the board and the chief executive relationship during this time. You'll see here kind of the little cycles of really this circular relationship. The board should be reviewing and responding to those strategic plans, right? So, not to throw it completely out the window, but the board needs to be reviewing it and help adapt. While the CEO should be managing the operations, the operational planning, and executing those plans. But most importantly, the board should be reviewing and responding and providing feedback. The key word here, as I said, pivot. Both the board and the executive director must be flexible. I think you all can understand that. These are challenging and unprecedented times that we're in. But really important, both need to be considering all the ways that this crisis may evolve and what that impact could look like for your organization. Next slide. So first and foremost, I imagine most of you have probably already had this conversation, but how would the decision-making process look, right? We can't meet in person now. So first and foremost, the board needs to decide how they're going to meet and how they can conduct business. So the first thing we're recommending is that you review your bylaws, and some organizations are bound by sunshine laws here in the state, and determine whether or not you can have a virtual meeting, and really importantly, how the voting is going to take place. I'll be the first to admit, last year we spent the entire year reviewing our bylaws. We spent months going through and updating them and bringing them up to speed. And then when this happened, we went right to our bylaws, and there was nowhere in there that allowed us to be able to vote there was one little clause about committees could use video conferencing, but not the full board. So we had to address that when we convened for the first time on Zoom. So check your bylaws and see what your rules are for how you can meet, if you can use video conferencing, and most importantly, whether or not you can vote and how that will look. Once your board does board meetings, really, they should be spending that time asking those tough questions. And I'm going to share some with you that you can take back and share with your board. But they need to be having important discussions about the needs of the organization. We also recommend that they engage in scenario planning. So having conversations about what they might need to have to move forward if this continues on. So they need to be looking not just next week, not just the next month, but 6 months from now, and how the rest of this year could evolve. Go ahead, next slide. Here's a few questions that you're welcome to take back and share with your organization that we'll touch base on. Here's what the board should be asking one another. What aspects of this situation could affect their organization? Could they be potentially decreasing in staffing? What if an illness is to occur with a stakeholder or an employee? Are they going to be able to continue delivering client services? I know these are things that at the staff level, you're in the front lines, you're in the trenches, and you have a good handle of, but does the board have a good grasp of what impacts your organization is facing? What's your organization's greatest vulnerability? As Leslie mentioned, we have done that assessment. We're going to be doing it again next week. But one of the glaring things that came from that was the fact that 60% of the 85 organizations that responded to that assessment reported having 3 months or less of cash reserves, and 25% of those had no cash reserves. So what is your greatest vulnerability? The board needs to be discussing that. Ben is the pro at this. Well, when he speaks, he can address this more so than I, but the board needs to be asking, what questions from the media or the press would you least like to face? And I'm going to touch on a little bit of some internal and external communication strategies in a moment. But what questions do you least like to face? And we're going to talk about the importance of that strategy next. And then finally, how can we, as a board member of your organization, how can the board prevent worst case scenarios from occurring? So these are the things that they really need to be asking one another and making decisions on. Next slide. So let's talk about communications, because this is really, really key. The board should have a clear, defined plan in partnership with the staff. So the roles need to be defined to avoid confusion of who is going to say what. It is not the time for jockeying for position or who's going to be the spokesperson. This needs to be laid out of who is going to be key person and what that message is going to be. There's some perspectives that you need to consider, including in your communications plan, or and if you don't this expertise at the board level, if you can find it maybe on a volunteer level, but we're highly recommended that you have an HR resource. There's a lot of implications right now in liabilities when it comes to employee practices. We also are recommending financial advisor services, whether it's a CPA, financial advisor, or an investment manager, and also a bank officer. Last week we held the Wednesday webinar about the stimulus package and what all that means. And I know we spent Thursday and Friday on the phone with CPAs, with bank officers, trying to just learn all the nuances with the payroll protection program and what those implications are for nonprofits. So it's really important that you include those perspectives in the conversations that the staff and the board should be having right now. Organizations might want to consider a media strategy that would include a press kit with facts about the organization. That press kit could also include talking points or else a frequently asked question sheet. And then the other thing you want to make sure that you and your board that you have identified and that you have is contact information for your key stakeholders. So whether that's your executive leadership or your major donors, you want to make sure that you have that at your disposal. And then with that communications plan, you should make some decisions about a time frame for when you're going to communicate, who's going to receive the communication, and what the message is going to be. Right now, we're spending Friday afternoons, and I'm contacting my board, and what the board is hearing might be in more detail than what we're sending out to our major donors. And then we're also including community stakeholders and elected officials as well, and what that looks like, what we're sharing with each of those. So your organization should really think about, how often you want to communicate with your investors and what that message will be. So along the lines with communication is key. Here are some more questions that you will definitely want an answer, or the board should be talking about what the answer is to these questions. So what information should you as an organization share with the public? And again, you want the board engaged in this piece. So just not necessarily an executive director decision, but have the board engaged with this. Who's going to be the main point of contact? Is there a communication tree in place? So who's going to be the voice of your organization? Will it be the executive director? Will it be your board chair? Or do you have a communications officer or a communications chair that will assume that role? Who is going to be responsible for managing the crisis, and what are their duties? Depending on what your subsector is, there could be more impact that you want somebody who has more experience in handling crisis communication. And then finally, do you have or do you need a crisis task force to help manage the communications, that both internal and external, that are going out? So again, these are just some questions that you can take back and share with your board. Next slide. I think everyone is facing this right now, and I share that graph in hopes that that's the market, and we see it. We see it recovering and going in the right direction. The financial situation right now is critical for nonprofit organizations. And it goes back to those legal obligations I mentioned. The board has a fiduciary responsibility for the organizations that they govern. And this is just a critical piece, and probably one of the most important pieces where the board needs to be involved, and they need to be communicating and discussing and planning. So the board must be discussing the potential and what I put most likely changes to this year's budget. People are having to cancel events. According to our assessment, I think that was upwards of 80% have been impacted so far financially, and what that could look like for your organization. The board and the CEO should jointly think about the ability to secure future grants and donations. Do you have the capability and the ability to go after grants? And just like as I mentioned last week, the payroll protection program, is the board fully aware of the implications of that, and what some of the pitfalls could be if you get approved for it. So again, the board has to be engaged in your financial conversations. And also, there need to be conversations now about short-term and long-term viability of your organization's assets, and whether or not you need to dip into reserves, and if so, when. And if you happen to have an endowment, what does that look like? At what point do you release restrictions? Speaking from the foundation, I have my foundation hat on right now. At the statewide level, we've been sitting in on conference calls every week with about 70 plus foundations from around the state. And almost every one of them are releasing their restrictions. They're providing more operating support. These are the conversations that they are already having right now, because we know that changes are still coming. So it is critical that your board be discussing in detail the financial situation and the financial health of your organization. Next slide. And most importantly, as I said, the duty of care, the duty of loyalty to the organization. The board needs to be considering the staff and stakeholder safety of your organization. A lot of us have moved to remote work, so the board must be updated of any of those decisions or changes that the executive director may be making. It's not up to the executive director to suddenly cancel events without consulting the board, or cancel services. I don't know if any of you have a remote worker policy, but this might be a good time to consider, what does that look like? What does your technology support look like? Are there privacy issues that you could be violating by taking organizational files home and working from home? And is that okay with the board? So again, you want to make sure that you're complying, and really try to avoid getting in any kind of trouble. And then most importantly, is there a plan in place if someone is diagnosed with COVID-19? If somebody on the staff gets a positive test result, what would your next steps be? Has the board discussed that or thought about that? Is there a communication plan in place that I had mentioned? Who would you contact, and how would you go about it? So again, these are things that your board should be considering. And these are not just one-time conversations. This needs to be on an ongoing, continual basis. Crisis response and communication planning is never over. You must monitor the situation and adjust your communications as time goes by. It's very important to maintain communication between executive leadership. So it's not the time for a power struggle. It's not the time for the board and executive leadership to be divided. They really have to come together. There has to be open lines of communications. And very importantly, the board needs to continue to analyze the risk and update your strategy as needed. I wasn't joking when we said most of us have thrown our strategic plans out the window. We already know that our goals that we had set by September or not, they're probably not going to be achieved, because we've had to pivot here in March and April. And there is no doubt that leadership will be tested during this trying time. I look at this from a governance perspective, and boards are going to be put to the test. They're going to have to make hard and tough decisions. But again, if they can be asking these questions now, they'll be better armed and better prepared for what lies ahead. Question? So I wanted to just kind of keep that brief, plant some seeds, some ideas with you, and I'd love to open it now for any questions.
And feel free to type in the questions in the chat, or raise your hand and we can unmute you, or you can type your question in the chat.
Or if anyone has any suggestions that they would love to share, or something that their board has done, or that you found that you're coming together, or something that we didn't touch on, please, we love to share ideas. I laugh because all of our board they've become quick learners of Zoom. We were able to get, I think, 24 out of 20 on with only, I think, 2 that had technical difficulty. Oh, wonderful. So Mary Mary Chance has some sample remote worker policies that she would be willing to share. Thank you, Mary.
And we can circulate those around after the call. So thanks, Mary.
So I am going to stay on because I will not miss in his presentation. So I'll be on. So at any time, if you have any questions or comments, please use the chat or raise your and jump in at any time.
Thank you, Barzella, and I'm sure as questions come up, you'll be on the call to be able to answer any more questions. So now I wanted to move to our, we do have one question, Barzella, can we hop back? Somebody's asking, what are some suggestions for hiring during this time? Do you have any thoughts, Barzella?
Well, that would be wonderful if you were hiring. From a board conversation, just make sure that it's the board's in the loop that you're going to be hiring and what that's going to look like, especially if you're an essential worker and you're still going in, or if you're going remote based, what would that trend of onboarding a new hire right now? And if anyone has any suggestions, please use the chat bubble to chime in.
All right, well, we'll leave you on, Barzella, and we will move to Ben, our next presentation. And I think Ben's just going to make it conversational. And so I'm going to go unmute Ben and let him do a quick introduction about what he's working on now and help provide us some tips and some open dialogue that we can talk about. All right, Ben, I think you are unmuted.
I think I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Wonderful. First off, thanks, Barzella, and thanks, Leslie, and thanks to all of you that are continuing to keep your nonprofits up and running in a time that none of us could have really even planned about. You know, we do crisis communication planning and scenarios all the time, but I think the global pandemic was one that maybe we could have done a refresher on, I don't know, but I don't know if it would have changed the way that we're doing things. But just like Barzella said, you can take those strategic plans that you had and your 5-year plans, whatever, and just toss those out of the window because we are completely rewriting business as we speak now. I had the opportunity to be a Gainesville police officer for about 14 years. And as many of you know, the last 6 to 7 years of that, I spent as the spokesperson for the agency. Also got to sit on some state and national boards when it comes to information and social media through government. I'm now lucky enough to work for Allstate's enterprise media and PR team. We're a team of 11 that handles everything from issues and crisis management to top tier media relations. And a little aside, I was actually hired as a remote worker 2 years ago, and that's what I do all the time now. So thus my "can I take your order" headset, if you like that one. But I'm hired on as a remote worker, so if you come on with any questions about remote work, pretty much Allstate, a company of 35,000 people, has taken about 90% of our workforce and from a business environment into a work from home environment. So love to answer your questions there if I can as well. Like I said, working with Allstate, just Monday, we announced that if you're an Allstate customer, we're giving back about $600 million. I know numbers that big, you know, make all of us, I don't know what they make us, but I'm honored to be able to work with a company that's able to do something like that. And then I also do work with the Allstate Foundation as well. I am not an expert by any means when it comes to this kind of stuff. I've enjoyed some wonderful successes, and this situation is new to all of us. And I can tell you that my company is actually looking at this pandemic, and I'm looking at it from a social media perspective, similar to a disaster. So some of this would be similar to how we would operate in a hurricane, just with tremendously different outcome. But when it comes down to social media, the good thing about social media that we know is it's yours. You own it. It's not earned. You don't have to convince a reporter or a producer to tell a story. You get to connect directly to your audience. So in doing that, be thoughtful and strategic. And I'm just going to throw a few tips out here that have worked for me, and then I'll open up the floor for questions. Be thoughtful and strategic. Some ideas sound really wonderfully unique at the time. Make sure that you're getting everybody together to think about it that you need to, and think about those long-term consequences of your message. Put people first. Everything else is second, especially when you're talking about nonprofits. Put the people out there first, the people that you're helping, the people that you're empowering with your financial donations, those kind of people. Tell a story. We know that people are going to listen and watch through their emotions. And for those of you that are doing social and doing news pitching and stuff like that, do not forget your SEO, because there is a ton of noise to punch through. For Allstate, we were able to punch through because we're saying we're giving $600 million back to our customers, and that was able to allow us to punch through all the top tier media, and also we started an industry trend since we were the first ones to be able to do it. So act quickly, but act strategically at the same time, because we're competing with a lot of other people and a lot of other digital data coming back into people. Continue to inspire, continue to tell your story, continue to let your audience know what you need. Your social media followers made a conscious effort to follow your social media account. They didn't just wake up and they're following you one day. They got some content from you at some point that says, hey, we want to follow you, so let's do this. So make those followers feel like part of a larger team. For instance, for me, when I was running GPD social, humor and levity worked for me, and I was able to use it. Donut jokes were easy. Donut jokes were great. Silly cop things. I was able to use that and make fun of ourselves and make fun of myself personally sometimes to do that. Obviously, in a situation like this, be very careful in how you choose to engage. You know your audience is better than anybody, and you'll know what will work for you and know what won't work for you. A word of advice: we all have had to somewhat switch up the way that we talk. We've had to switch up our brand tone and voice at times. Don't quickly do that. If you're going to change something dramatically, let your audience know. Do a Facebook Live, do a pinned post or something like that that says, hey, we understand that these are trying times, so we're going to speak to you maybe in a little bit different way, because we know everybody wants the same information. I've always enjoyed seeing the nonprofits in Gainesville and North Central Florida just do amazing stuff together. The Amazing Give, just to see everybody come together at one time and do that. So continue to do that. Lean on others, lean on your other nonprofits, lean on everybody else. This is a great time to form some local partnerships that don't exist already. Look, we're all in this together. None of us asked us to be here. So let's look for creative ways to help one another. And that always doesn't have to be money or financials. So we're going to take some questions. But first, I wanted to leave you with this as well on my tips and tricks. As a remote-based worker, somebody that's been working from home for 2 years, it's very easy to get sucked into to work and let that work-life balance slip. All of us are working from home now, even including the president of corporations and stuff like that. They're all working from home. Everybody's got kids. Everybody's got loud kids. Everybody's got dogs. And our team actually has a conference called Bingo Sheet that we work off of to make sure that, okay, I think you're unmuted, and I'm stepping over somebody. So those things are going to happen, and that work-life balance is fade. So make sure that you're taking the time to take care of yourself. Remember why you do the work that you do, and the messaging you create in the coming days and weeks will literally save people's lives through donations and volunteer efforts. And like I said, just thinking about yourself, thinking about your family and your children this time, everybody's doing it. So it's okay to do that. So I will gladly open up for some questions more towards social, and I can, if you want to throw them in the chat, if you want to raise your hand, if you want to send a carrier pigeon. I'm actually in High Springs, so it's not too far to get there.
And if you want us to unmute you, please hit in the chat bubble that you want us to unmute, because your question might be too long to type, and we can do that.
Sure.
So Ben, it looks like I'm getting some messages sent privately. So I have one that Barzella and you might both be able to answer.
Okay.
It's kind of long, so I'm going to summarize it. But the question sort of is around when you know to go back to your regular business as usual. Now, obviously, business is not as usual, but okay? And how do you continue on past relief and recovery when your organization still has messaging and things to get across? I hope that question makes sense. I'm trying to summarize, but is it okay to go back and post stuff you normally would have done? Like if you did a post every Monday about something, could you continue on with that? And then I guess where Barzella might come in the question is, trying not to ignore business that has to get done despite the epidemic.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And when you're doing one Zoom, if you turn off your Skype so your work buddies don't get you. I am so sorry. All right, you were talking about how we know when to go back to normal.
Yes.
And that's a very good question. And you just have to keep a pulse on things. For a lot of people are up in the air. I mean, think about it, daily routines, fitness centers, workouts, gyms, everybody's up in the air and they want some sense of normalcy. So if you have a hashtag Monday post or a hashtag Wednesday wisdom or something like that, throw that out there. Absolutely. Keep your folks engaged. Keep them knowing that, yeah, we've got a crisis, we've got a pandemic going on right now, but we're still a big family, we're still a big team. So I would absolutely keep something going if it's a consistent message and it's appropriate to the conversation of the day.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that was great. I'm trying to unmute Barzella. There you are. Barzella's going to unmute you if you wanted to add something to that as well.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm telling you, I move around in my dining room and it gets a little squirrely in here. So yeah, I agree with what Ben is saying that having that balance. We're in a new norm right now, so this is our new norm. So we have pivoted some things that we're doing. I know many of you saw that we were doing the trivia Thursdays. We did not abandon that yet, but we just decided we needed to shift the focus to our organizations that are using the Amazing Give, or they're doing great work, or they have needs. So we're shifting just that right now until it looks like we can go back to Trivia Thursdays, and then we'll do that. But really, we're just trying to establish as much normalcy as we can. I've seen where the fundraising officers are doing the development officers here are doing their virtual happy hours, and they're able to, and it's been very well received. Our staff, we are usually at 9 o'clock every morning, we hop on and how are you doing, and just check in on each other individually before we dive into the work, because yes, our work has definitely taken a whole different direction. So having that support, trying to make it somewhat normal, and then yeah, like Ben said, just remember there's the work that still has to be done, even though we are in these uncharted waters right now.
Okay, so we have a couple more questions. Ben, this one will say for you. It says, where should I be sharing content? My personal page, my organization's page, both. I'm looking to understand the delicate balance of maintaining our organization's voice versus losing my own identity while getting out vital messaging. Let's see. Ben,
All right. Yeah, I am here now. There we go. Sorry, I was catching up on my Tiger King. Hopefully, I had some laughter back in there. We'll see. The question was where to post and how to do it. And there's not really, unfortunately, a good answer for that. It depends on your personal friend circle, and it also depends on the social media following that you've garnered for your brand or your organization at this point. I would do a little bit, a mixture of both, and it also depends. Like when I was the spokesperson for GPD, it was rare that I went outside of talking from the GPD hat and put on the this is Ben speaking hat. And I mean, one time I ended up doing that and landing on CNN, so I quit doing that for a little while. But just you have to know who you're talking to, and if coming from Jane Doe is going to affect a message rather than coming from Jane Doe's boutiques or something like that, then maybe that'll work. And without just a whole lot of extra stuff, I'm hoping that's the best answer I could give to that question for you.
Great. The next question is, are there any social media landmines to avoid to prevent, is there any landmines to avoid during this crisis?
There are going to be landmines everywhere. We, for instance, the press release that we issued on Monday was a simple one-page press release, but in my hand, I've got 12 pages of key messages and question and answers and pivots and hard question and answers that we're expecting from the media. And so it's going to depend on a ton of different factors, but just being very, very, very cognizant about when we're talking about people. And I know some of the shift is talking about people who are being personally affected by this pandemic and by this disease, if they're being, personally affected in their health or just the windfall of it. So when you're getting down into the part about your own people maybe being affected by it, just be very cognizant about HIPAA and stuff like that. But as far as social media landmines, I don't think anybody knows right now, because everybody, all the social media community, even some of the folks I talk to on the corporate level, everybody's just kind of, this is truly one of those instances where we're going to fake it until we make it. We're going to be very strategic about how we think, but nobody knew what this was going to be. So everything could be a landmine. So just think as strategically as you can when you're crafting your messaging.
Great, thanks, Ben. So the next question is, what about hashtags? Are they okay to use? Can you put, the coronavirus COVID-19 hashtag? What type of hashtags would be okay?
Yeah, hashtags rule the world. We know that, and we've seen it do great things, and we see it, especially through Instagram and Twitter. We know that just from research that journalists prefer Twitter. So if you've got a hashtag that you're following for your brand or creating for your brand, then that's a good way to put everything together. And as we know, you can hop on the hashtag bandwagon depending on what's out there currently, what's trending, or you can create your own. If you were to create hashtag CF NCF COVID response or something of that nature, just make sure that obviously it's done tastefully, and you kind of think about every possible variation of spellings and stuff as you're coming through.
Great. Now this one is kind of a double question, and so two parts. Who should be managing the social media channel? Should it be my CEO, marketing director, an intern? And then with that question, should I be sharing government updates on my organization's page?
Okay, very good question. The short answer is, unfortunately, it should have been figured out a while ago, but for a lot of people, we're finding out all of a sudden we're truly pivoting and truly putting on hats that we may have never worn before. Who does your social, I think, depends on a lot of different factors, but the best practice that I would recommend is it's got to be somebody on your that's in your communications world. I know that some of your organizations are very small with very small staff, and a lot of people wearing a lot of different hats. So if your CEO, if your person in charge is good at that and very engaging and willing to take that on in the midst of their other duties, great. But most of the time, it's going to be better if you have your communications people who are attached directly to your CEO, because that's the best way for that reporting structure to work. You have to know the messaging of the person in charge. And it's trial and error. Absolutely try. And if a tone doesn't work, if somebody's engagement doesn't work, then switch it around. We're all adults and can figure out that some of us can write differently than others. And while I, enjoyed working at social media for 6 years at GPD, I don't get to touch it at Allstate yet. I've got to work my way up there. So it just kind of depends on your organization, depends on the size of the organization. But if you can have a communications person run it, that's going to be your best bet.
And what about sharing government updates on your page?
Sharing government updates on your page, it's good, but be aware of how many times that you're doing things. For instance, I've seen the High Springs Fire Department posting some updates, and they're written very well. They're packaged very well. Just the way they're coming across is very well is good, and sometimes they're more. I read them better than I do another government thing. So, and they're sharing it. It's just the way that they present the news sometimes. So I wouldn't post like 15 government updates in a day. I would limit it to maybe one or two, or if it's a significant update that you want to help amplify that message, or if it's a public safety thing and we need to amplify that message, then absolutely. But it's going to start getting really, really noisy out there if you start sharing just all the government updates.
Okay, so now we're switching a little bit from social media into media. And I know I'm going to unmute Barzella for this one as well, but there was a question about when you have a really true, and everyone has emergency needs, but when you have a really dire emergency need, how do you cut through the noise of everyone reaching out to the media to be able to get your messaging out there? And I'm also going to, if you want to go first, Ben, I'm going to unmute Barzella as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Let me put something else into perspective. I also write for the Allstate Foundation and handle press releases for that. We're working on a grant program. I think the number, I can't remember the number, but it's in the millions of dollars that we're supporting domestic violence networks. We're using the word emergency, we're using the word immediate, and we're using the word critical, but that news release isn't going to go out until next week because we have to cut through the noise. We have to figure out timing. So it's not always messaging that's going to do that. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's writing a creative headline or a creative email pitch to who you're trying to get this into, but a lot of times it's down to those reporter relationships as well. That was one of the things that helped me do really good things in Gainesville with the media. Is I was always in the newsrooms. I was always making sure that they had what they needed from my organization. So when I needed to, I could pick up the phone to TV20 and go, hey Dave, Paige, I need y'all to throw this on in the evening if you can do that. Yeah, I know it's kind of boring, but I need you to do that. So a mixture of having relationships with the reporter and lean on each other. If you've got somebody else that has that relationship, there are a lot of us in here that will help however we can. And then just making sure that your message is punching through. And thirdly, you have to monitor the news cycle of the day to figure out what's the big news. So for like us in the insurance world, we're having the rest of the companies give money back to their customers. So we're not saying anything for a couple of days until next week when we figure our timing is going to be better.
So I wanted to add on to that, just because I've been in constant communication with local reporters for the past week. One thing I wanted to just share is I'm sure everybody is aware the Gainesville Sun is seeing staffing cuts right now. They're reducing their amount of print edition right now. So that's going to be a struggle, I think, in the first place to try to get over with the Sun just because of their own staffing concerns and what they're going through right now. So you really have to start being a little, more non-traditional in the way that you want to get your messaging out there. I had a talk with the county earlier this week, and the county's Facebook page has just been blowing up. I think they ran something Sunday that had 10,000 likes. So, and they've done an assessment recently where Alachua County residents, 40% of them are getting their news from the county's Facebook page, followed behind WCJB, and then followed behind that is the Gainesville Sun. So you might want to start thinking out of the box for mediums to get your message out there, especially with critical and urgent needs. And then the other I wanted to point out is, really sometimes utilize some of the existing Facebook groups. We had a donor 2 weeks ago to open up a medical response fund, and Pegeen Henneran took to Facebook asking for volunteers to sew masks, and she posted it at like 8 o'clock on a Friday night. And by Monday, it had exploded. And now she's got over 300 volunteers who are going to be sewing masks. And the Miami Herald picked up the story last week. So it ran down in Miami. What was going on in Gainesville did. So, she used social media as a way to get the message out, just asking for volunteers and asking for help. So, use that, think out of the box for how to get your message out.
Great. Thank you both. So we have only a few more minutes. We want to wrap this up by about 2:45. So Ben, I wanted to give you a second to do some last minute thoughts and sort of a couple of questions that came in, summarize these last ones for anyone that our nonprofits could go stalk, could go look at, just somebody who's doing a really good job with this emergency response on their Facebook page that maybe you could share that everyone could go visit. And then some final thoughts.
All right, I used to live in the social media ecosphere for a long time, but my 10 to 12-hour days have precluded a little bit of my social media browsing time lately. So I unfortunately can't offer anybody that's been doing a good job because I haven't seen anybody do any work with it. I've just been so sucked into it. So as I say, watch for your work-life balance. I need to also do my own work-life balance. So thanks. But as far as as just final thoughts, strategic, strategic, strategic. When you come up with an idea, when you come up with a communications ideas, and you should be doing this, your creatives within your organization, even remotely, should be coming up with different ways to get your message out. And I wish I had the answer of what's going to be the best way for one person to get it out and the best way for another one to get it out. It comes down to knowing your audiences. It's so funny because we're so distant physically at each other, but I think companies and teams are becoming closer because of it. We're figuring out what it takes to do remote work. We're figuring out what it takes to have kids and dogs in the background of our conference calls. We had the president of Allstate doing an interview or doing an interview test, and his cat got in. So people understand that this is a new world. So take care of yourselves, take care of your organizations, and just be strategic. I cannot say that enough. Just think everything through as you're going through this.
Well, thank you, Ben, and thank you, Barzella, for presenting, and thank you all for listening to our second Wednesday webinar. Just some last minute advice. I saw that Ben dropped his email in the chat. If anybody wants to reach out to him for any additional questions or sharing ideas. And also, please visit the Community Foundation resource page. All of the things for the needs request, our needs assessment going out next week, and any information about how our local communities have been responsive, please visit our page. We look forward to seeing you back next Wednesday. Next Wednesday, we're working on a special guest, so hopefully you will join us. If you do have ideas for Wednesday webinars or anything that you would like to hear, please reach out to us. And you visit our social media page, the Community Foundation. We are trying to highlight what nonprofits are doing right now. So if you had, please email me if you have a story you want us to share, and we will work on trying to get you into our social media as well. So thank you all. Be safe, and we will see you guys back here next Wednesday. Thanks, everyone.